Today's episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards takes us inside one of the most bizarre and heartbreaking modern spiritual movements you've probably never heard of. Until now. My guest is Andrew Ryan Profaci, who once lived at the center of Love Has Won, a controversial spiritual group led by the self-proclaimed deity Amy Carlson, known to followers as Mother God. Andrew wasn't just a believer. He was chosen by Carlson herself as Father God, her closest spiritual and romantic partner. But what began as a search for love and meaning quickly unraveled into a world of manipulation, control, and emotional trauma.
While you're there, in the middle of it, isolated from the outer world, with no reference points to guide you inside the bubble, it's hard to say. You just feel lost in a sense. There's nothing to, you need the outer world and those reference points to triangulate where you're really at. So when you're isolated in the bubble and don't have the outer world to give you these reference points, it's easy to get lost and not realize it.
Let's join part one of this two-part series of this gripping conversation with Andrew Ryan Profaci.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. And today we're celebrating a huge milestone. It's our second anniversary. Over the past 2 years, we've sat down with everyday people living through extraordinary circumstances, and we've learned to get lessons that we'll never forget. And none of it would be possible without you, the listeners. Thank you for showing up episode after episode, 138 episodes so far. I would like to give a special shout out to Clark Moore, who has listened to and reviewed every single episode. Clark, you are the real MVP. So to mark this second anniversary, I'm joined by author Andrew Ryan Profaci, a former member of the controversial cult known as Love Has Won. His story has been featured on Dateline NBC, Vice, and HBO. So we're going to talk about his book and we're going to talk about his life. It's a powerful story of belief, recovery, and finding your voice. So let's get right into it. Andrew, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be here. And to your audience, thank you all for being here. Hope to give you guys an awesome, exciting show.
All right. So my research says that you grew up as a Catholic and survived a horrific traffic accident at age 18 and you used to be a car salesman.
That's right.
So how did you cross a line that took you from that experience to Amy Carlson and Love Has Won?
It's a good question. When you say from that experience, you mean the car accident itself?
Well, just all of it. Just a relatively normal experience. Obviously, a car accident is a horrific normal experience, but
Sure.
Like being a car salesman is a normal thing. Growing up as a Catholic, especially in New Jersey, is a normal thing. But
yeah, and then they come in out of nowhere. Yeah, okay, gotcha. Yeah, no, I was raised, pretty normal life, although parents are divorced. Dad did a great job, best he could, with me and my brother. I was raised in a Roman Catholic family, received communion, confirmation. I went to CCD, which, all the kids, hated. It was like going to school twice in a day. But nevertheless, got through it all. And, unfortunately, I was on not the greatest road when I was a youngster. I had some issues, family stuff, and didn't have really role model around. My father worked a lot. And although he really did a great job when we were younger kids, into my teenage years, he actually came out as gay. And back in the late 90s, it wasn't something that was really protected. It wasn't okay like it is now. It wasn't something that was as accepted. And, it really singled me out for a lot of, teasing. And it started to become something that I thought I I identified with in the sake that it kind of, defined me. And I began to rebel and just sent myself down not the greatest of roads, and literally and figuratively, because it did end up in a really terrible car accident when I was 18. Bad decisions, shouldn't have been driving. And while I was the passenger, my best friend who was driving passed away. He was driving his car, something that was really hooked up, souped up, had some money under the hood, loved to drive fast. I don't have much of a recollection of the accident itself, but he wrapped us around a tree at a really high rate of speed. He was killed instantly. My pelvis exploded. We had two girls in the car who were sitting in the back. They were relatively unscathed, all things considered. One had a broken ankle. One had, a cut on her head. But other than that, they're pretty much okay. All the three of us really, have blessings to count for sure, because the violence of the accident wasn't something that you would probably anticipate anybody would walk away from.
Wow.
It took me some time to start walking again, but I did. And that accident really woke me up in the sense that it made me realize that, life was precious, that I was clearly, pushing my limits, again, literally and figuratively. I was really pushing, the boundaries of what was acceptable for what I thought life was supposed to be. And I realized it just wasn't who I wanted to be. And I had a lot of time to think, during my recovery, a lot of time to reflect. When your friend passes away in a situation like that, it makes you think, makes you feel like you don't want it to be in vain. And at least that's how I felt. And so that began, or at least planted the seed for what would become my seeking, my awakening over the years. And while it wasn't something that happened overnight, I began to grow curious, one, with the simple fact of how I was able to walk away from that accident with my life intact. I felt like God had been with me and protected me. It began to leave some questions in my mind about the nature of our lives, of reality, of God, of his power in our lives, the hidden mysteries of life. Are angels real? Were they protecting me during that accident? My friend laid on top of me dead for 90 minutes while they cut us out of the car, and my brain took the entire memory away. I remember nothing. And that was another interesting piece of the puzzle to me. It was like, very fascinating that my mind just kind of took the memory and got rid of it. Not that it's something that I want to remember, but, these things just planted questions, and the seeds of wanting to find meaning, they began to grow. And I began to find my way. I began to put things together, finding a good groove in life. Had a great job that I worked for a couple years. And when I really began my awakening in 2013, 2014, I started looking into spirituality, conspiracy theories as well. I had a really curious mind when it came to the reality and the nature of life. I felt like conspiracy theories played a large role in my awakening, because they kind of pointed to the fact, or the idea, at least the belief, that life isn't quite as black and white as maybe we think, that there's more here to be found if you want to find it. And it kind of opened me up to this path of seeking. And unfortunately, conspiracy theories had started to crash my worldview in a lot of ways, because I really had gotten carried away with them. And you'll find with cults and conspiracy theories, they really go together strongly, because people who begin to seek conspiracy theories, these big questions, why are we being lied to? Why are we able to do all these things? Yet, we have people going hungry. We have homeless. We have, people starving, yet, we have billionaires living in these mansions with all this extra money, and it would only take, $50 billion a year. You're asking all these big questions, and it doesn't seem like anybody else in your life even cares. And then you find a group of people who are asking the same questions, and you feel like you found a community. And that's what I felt like I had found when I first came across what was known back then as the First Contact Ground Crew Team. It's quite a mouthful, but that group became known as Love Has Won.
Okay, so I want to break it down a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
We'll get to all those details, including the conspiracy theories, but I want to sort of build the foundation of the what led up to that first.
Please.
So what drew you to Amy's teachings or energy in the beginning, specifically Amy's organization?
The first thing that drew me to her was the fact that I didn't have to search across the internet all day long for different articles. What her team did, the people that were with her, was they aggregated content from all the different websites, and they posted it in one place every day. And that's what actually drew me to her at first, was because I found a place where I could just, get all my information in one spot. And I didn't realize it, but looking back, that's where the isolation began, because I started cutting off outside information. And then, I was only getting it from one place. And they had a chat room, and there was a little button in the top right corner of the website. And I went into the chat room, and there's 20, 30 people, most of them on a path of seeking and asking questions, caring about the meaning of life, caring about these conspiracy theories, and, asking, these, forbidden questions, and talking about these forbidden topics that, mainstream doesn't want to talk about. Here I am feeling, increasingly distanced between myself and my family and friends, colleagues I work with, people who aren't interested in these questions or these answers. And this community of people in this chat room, were asking all of these things. And we had that much in common. And because of my car accident, I was in a place, or had the belief, that at the end of the day, life could end tomorrow for anybody. And, I never thought of that until my car accident. And it made me realize, or feel at least, that there was a lot more value in seeking and getting answers to these big questions than there was in, living up to what a normal life should be, the house, the nice car, 2.5 kids, and, going down that path. I just felt it was more important for me. And I felt a strong pull in the direction of seeking answers to these big questions. And that's where the attraction came from. And specifically about Mother God was because I just felt that while I had seen lots of spiritual teachers through different YouTube videos, there was plenty of content that you could find everywhere. Here was somebody that I could actually reach out and touch, in the sense that I could talk to her. I could ask her questions. She was available to me. Whereas the other people were more like gurus or icons that, you couldn't really touch them or reach out to them or talk to them. It was more or less you could just watch their videos, but that was about it. And that was important for me because it enabled me to develop a strong personal connection with her. And that's essentially how it started.
All right. So was there a specific moment that made you believe she was Mother God?
No, there wasn't one moment that was like, oh, this is her. It was the fact that I was in a really impressionable place because the conspiracy theories had essentially destroyed my worldview. They had wrecked it down and brought it down to the foundations. There was nothing left, and now I'm in this place where I'm trying to rebuild what I think my idea of reality truly is. And a part of me wanted to believe that I had stumbled upon something really special, almost like, a hidden sacred gem that was beginning this awakening for humanity. And I wanted to believe that it was true. I wanted to believe that I had been led to this place, by divine guidance, if you will, that I was meant to be there, that it wasn't, accidental or coincidental that I had stumbled upon them, that there was a real reason, excuse me, that there was a real reason why I was here. And I projected my own beliefs onto her because it really, her being Mother God served to kind of confirm that desire to believe like I had found what I was seeking, or at least had gotten on the right path to finding it. So essentially, I projected my own desires onto her. And there wasn't one moment. I think it was just, all of that put together. And I wanted it to be true. And that's the thing about these groups is they lose sight of truth and belief. Belief becomes truth. And that's where I feel they get lost. I didn't have the foresight to see it back then, but 10 years later, I can look back and I feel that's the case, and that's what happened.
Okay, so you've said that you were closer to Amy than anyone. How did that closeness begin, and what did Father God mean in your day-to-day life?
So the closeness began, really, I had some spiritual experiences that, through meditation, that really, had a profound impact on me. Without them, I probably wouldn't have joined her team. When I began talking to her in the chat room, we started a personal relationship from a distance, no different than anybody else. But then I had a couple of nights where she was in my dreams for not just a couple of nights. It was a good 4, 5, or 6 nights in a row. And after the first couple of nights, I thought about telling her. But I didn't want to come off like some kind of fanboy, so I didn't bring it up. And a couple nights later, after, 4 or 5 nights in a row, I thought, okay, I've got to say something because this is just too strange. And I looked up to her as somebody who was much more spiritually adept than me, and maybe she could explain what this meant. I messaged her personally and I told her about the dreams, and she said, yeah, I've been having the same dreams about you. Knowing Amy what I know now, that probably wasn't true. She was an opportunist in a lot of ways, and she jumped on opportunities when she saw them. She saw me as a new shiny object. Father God to her really was just the next guy that she was interested in. And because she considered herself to be Mother God, she projected this Father God thing onto the next guy she was interested in. That said, I'll back up real quick. I had the dreams and I told her, she says, yes, I've been dreaming about you too. I asked her what it meant, and she said, this means you're on the right path, but you're supposed to be here with us. You're supposed to join the team. You have a large role to play in helping to humanity to awaken. And this was music to my ears. This was everything that I wanted to hear, right? She was kind of stroking my ego and telling me all the things that I wanted to be true. So I lapped it up and, plane ride and a 5.5 hour taxi ride later, and I was walking through the front door at 5:30 in the morning in the middle of November in 2014. And she was in completely incoherent state when I arrived, and the first thought I had was, oh my God, I made a terrible mistake. And over the course of a couple of days, she brought me right into the team, right next to her. I mean, set me up next to her as far as where we worked from the table on our laptops. And the second or third day there, she pulled me aside into the bedroom and had what I call the Father God talk with me. Sat me down and told me that I was, destined to get rid of my ego and be the vessel for this great consciousness to come into reality for the first time and to help spark an awakening that would change the world for forever, for the better, to help awaken humanity, Father God and Mother God living on the planet the first time. And, this is the party is starting, we're going to wash away all the bad stuff and, start again. And, it was completely uncomfortable. I didn't see it coming. I thought I was going to be just another guy in the background, working, just another team member. I had no intentions of having a relationship with her, a personal one. But, that went along with the whole Father God talk. At the end of that talk, when she went to leave the room and kind of leave me sitting there with my head in my hands as I'm trying to take this in. It was very heavy. She stopped at the door and turned around and said to me, and by the way, when you're ready to make love, let me know, and left the room. And it was, if I wasn't in a complete state of shock already, that really had set the tone. And that's how she brought me in, right next to her. She had an idea. She had her sights set on me from the very start. And she wanted me not just next to her and working closely with her, but she wanted a relationship. She wanted that closeness. And she wanted me to be, the Father God to her Mother God. Never did quite get comfortable with the idea, but that's essentially, to answer your question, the closeness, that's how it started. That was the genesis of it.
So you didn't go out and get business cards that said Father God. No, they didn't get to that point.
I'll tell you what, it was, when you're encapsulated in a bubble of the team and isolated, it felt like you're playing this cosmic game of house. And the names don't have as much meaning. It's almost just like, a screen name that you would choose online to go by. And it doesn't have much meaning. And you don't really think about it in the grand sense of how somebody on the outside would think of what you mean when your name comes across as Father God. And I never really did get comfortable. Every time she would go to make a video and she would go to introduce me, I would get the goosebumps, the chills, and it never sat right. There were so many people who would say to me, especially after I left, Andrew, we always thought you were so authentic, but you never looked comfortable in any of those videos. And, I guess they could see what I was going through, because that was hard for me to square that circle. Despite how much I wanted it to be real and how much I wanted to believe, it was still just a little bit too much for me to accept, although I tried.
You talk about comparing it to screen name. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. And speaking of names that sort of may mean something different to the outside world, what was your relationship with Michael, who believed that he was the Archangel Michael?
Yeah, so, at first, I should preface it by saying Michael was Amy's lieutenant. I mean, if she said jump, he said how high. If she said, the sky was green, he believed it. Fine. So he accepted me right away, accepted what she said and, treated me well right from the start. Almost like really friendly, almost a brotherly kind of vibe, living in the same house together over the first several weeks. But the more I began to express my discomfort with the beliefs that we had, the faster a gap in our relationship opened up because he was defensive of the belief system that had been created, very much so. As Amy's lieutenant or as her right-hand man, it was very important for him to kind of protect everything that she was building. So him and I, while we were close at the start, we butted heads over the 10 months I had been there. I mean, me and him went to war almost on a daily basis. And when I say war, I just mean verbally, is, just talking, never anything, too crazy. But, it was almost me versus him with Amy caught in the middle. And we can get into that a little bit more. But, that's what it was. He was essentially, Amy's lieutenant, whatever she said, he went along with. And, at first, while I was in that same place, looking up to her and following her advice for everything, things got to a certain point where I started to take back some of my own voice. And when I started to do that, my relationship with him changed very quickly.
So what was a turning point where you started to see red flags or question the mission?
Well, they started right away. I mean, the red flag started when I walked in the house. As I mentioned, the very first day when I showed up, I took 2 steps into the house. I looked left as I was coming in, and the kitchen was overrun with dishes, piled up in the sink, left on the counter. The house looked like a bomb had gone off. Clearly, with the house of, I think, 6 or 7 people, nobody had really cleaned in weeks. Layers of dust on the table they worked from, cigarettes and ashtrays all over the place. And that was completely antithetical to what I was anticipating was a clean, spiritual space. The vibe itself, the clutter, I feel, was a huge red flag. For as far as like personifying their beliefs and what was going on in their minds. So that was the first red flag. And the fact that when I showed up, Amy was completely incoherent, had been completely intoxicated. She had been on mushrooms even, and for 36 hours. And she was unable to even speak, couldn't lift her head. She was being held up in her chair by Michael so she wouldn't fall out of the chair. And, that image became really fascinating because it almost portrayed how everything would unfold over 9 months with Michael holding Mother God in her place so that she wouldn't fall out. Because when I eventually began to reject the belief system and fight to snap her out of it, it was always Michael holding her in place. And the red flag started the very first day right there. More red flags with the Father God thing. Tried to tell myself that she knows better than I do. I came here to follow her guidance, to grow and to learn. So that's what I'm going to do. And I kind of acquiesced and surrendered, was a big word for her, surrendered to her guidance for a while. And she had an alcohol problem and she was drinking nightly. And, the first couple of days when I realized this was a regular thing, and the amount of alcohol that she drank was more than I'd ever seen anybody drink on a regular basis. Another huge red flag. And when she would drink, she would tell stories and she would speak about, her life. And every story felt, I call it past polishing. She had woven the Mother God persona into every story she told about her life and how all of it always meant she was supposed to be Mother God. And she would go from crying 1 second to angry the next, to sad to happy. And I could tell that there was unresolved trauma, unresolved issues there. Meanwhile, she claimed because she was Mother God, that meant she had no ego. Because if she had any ego, she wasn't able to hold this Mother God consciousness. If she wasn't perfect, she wasn't able to be Mother God. And if I actually said to her, like, you actually think you're perfect, she would tell you, yes, I am perfect because I am Mother God. I couldn't be Mother God if I wasn't perfect. So, she set the bar pretty high for herself, standards that she could never live up to. The red flags were everywhere. And looking back, it's hard to think how, it even took me, I'd say, about 6 to 8 weeks for me to start asking questions. But, that's how long it took for me to kind of start to pull my own sense of self and a little bit of my authenticity, my voice back from this complete surrender to her. Because, if somebody who didn't believe walked in, it was obviously on its face, the whole thing was just bunk. It was one big red flag.
Okay, so when did you first start to hear the word cult associated with the organization?
Wow, not until Amy passed away. Although I should correct that. When I first joined, and my family was my mother most specifically was trying to get me to come back, and not stay with the team. She was calling it a cult. And, in that moment, I was in a place where I'm like, oh no, she just doesn't get it, and, after, they kind of accepted the fact that, this Andrew was going down this road. He's an adult. He's going to do what he's doing. I didn't hear that word used again, for a long time. You might have somebody come in the chat room and, start throwing around, you guys are all out of your mind. You're insane. This is a cult, and you didn't pay it much mind, kind of just kick somebody out of the chat room. That was a normal thing. But to really have it defined as a cult, that didn't start until this story really blew up late 2018, and then when Amy passed in 2021, when I really started to begin looking at it. And when I did my first few interviews after Amy passed, I remember they would ask me, do you think it was a cult? And I said, no, I believed it wasn't when I joined. And that was just proof of the fact that I hadn't processed what I had gone through. I had moved on from it in a way, physically, and created space. But it wasn't, really, until I wrote my book, The War on Love, that I really began to process or really finish processing everything. And I use that term finish processing very loosely because I think there's always growth left and I'll always find new angles. But it wasn't until after she passed away that I really began to consider whether or not it was a cult.
Okay, so what was the emotional or psychological toll of living in the core of that kind of a belief system?
It's a great question. While you're there in the middle of it, isolated from the outer world, with no reference points to guide you inside the bubble, it's hard to say. You just feel lost in a sense. There's nothing to, you need the outer world and those reference points to triangulate where you're really at. So when you're isolated in the bubble and don't have the outer world to give you these reference points, it's easy to get lost and not realize it. And I was lost. The best way I can describe it feeling is every day I had this tension in my chest and this pressure in my head. It was just a very uneasy feeling, like, part of me felt like I was intending to do something good, which I was. There was no doubt about that. But there was this, the red flags were there and they were constant. And you had, these two, you know, completely opposing beliefs, you know, in your head every day, combating these thoughts and trying to balance them was extremely difficult. And the only reason that I wasn't able to, grab a hold of myself sooner again was because we were isolated and cut off from the outside world. So you're in the bubble of this place. Like I said, it's like you're playing this cosmic game of house when everybody around you has the same beliefs as you. It kind of makes it easier to go along with things. But the toll was that I had lost my authenticity. I lost my independence. I lost my voice. I lost, everything that made me an individual. I had become a robot. I had become the same as everybody else. And although she would, do her name casting, which is, to give everybody, you're Archangel Michael, you're Archangel Lucifer, you're Father God, you're Horus, to make you feel special, like you are somebody important. The truth is, you were all the same. Nobody had any differing beliefs. You had all surrendered, right, to Mother God's belief system. You were nothing more than just a soldier in her army. And you lost all of your independence, everything about who you are. And that's what I had to fight to reclaim.
All right. Did you witness or experience any kind of abuse, whether it's emotional, spiritual, or physical, that people outside the group might not understand?
So, the abuse, yes. When I was there only the first few weeks, we had our youngest team member there, young Indian boy, very kind, very curious. And he started to have, the questions that everybody gets to at some point about, you say your Mother God. Here, I see you drinking. I see that you have unresolved issues. He's asking all these questions, and she just snapped. And I remember the first time that I saw it, I saw this anger burst out of her. It was probably only second or third day I was there. The first time it ever happened, I remember, caught me off guard because I didn't see that coming. Somebody who's confident in who they are doesn't need to be defensive and doesn't snap at somebody like that. And I didn't put it together quite then, but there were these control mechanisms were kind of baked into the environment because, one, you didn't want to speak out and have a target placed on your back. When this young boy spoke out against Amy, she tried to talk to him for a couple minutes. You have a conversation with somebody and you start to go back and forth. And as you go back and forth, you get closer and closer to the core of the issue. But when they got too close, she just started laughing at him because she didn't have more answers, right? Because it was, very superficial, the belief system. So when he started to break into it, she would just start laughing at him. She had this cackle that could, break glass. I mean, it would cut right through you. And she would just start laughing at you. And she would look at the rest of the team as she's laughing to kind of get you to start laughing with her. And, to be laughed at this way by the people that you lived with, that hurt. That was a really painful thing for me to witness happen to him. And it happened to me plenty of times too. And, that, no doubt, looking back, was abuse. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, because that was a really hurtful thing. And her only intention was to overpower you and to make it hurt so bad that you don't want to ever go there ever again. So again, we have these control systems that are baked into your environment. Nobody wants to speak out. It's easier to go along. You're in the bubble, cut off, you're isolated. That makes it easier. So you kind of just start going along with it, even if you don't believe. When somebody didn't believe anymore, they would just pack up and be gone that day. There'd be no fighting. They wouldn't be arguing about it. They'd just get out of here. And I gave him a lot of credit for fighting and asking the questions. But that was definitely abuse. She had picked up and was on even video doing this, picked up a kitten that we had by the scruff of its neck. Sometimes when she was drinking, she would just pick the cat up like as if the cat had telepathically said something bad to her, and would hold the cat up to her face and, act like she was telepathically speaking to the cat's soul. Meanwhile, the kitten is, crying because it's in pain. I'd seen that, and there was no physical abuse. It was all just mental control mechanisms. That was, and there was lots of them. I mean, we could talk for days about it. But as far as the abuse that I saw, that was most of it. That the mental stuff, and then the abuse of the kittens, and then there was abuse of the children that also happened later on that was documented, well after I had left.
Yeah, you described it as being angry. From what I saw in the documentary that I watched this weekend to prepare for this, I would call it raging. It was a step beyond anger. The guy who prepared her dinner, her meal, and brought her meatballs instead of chicken parmesan. Like, I like some chicken parmesan myself, but I also like meatballs. If somebody brought me one or the other, I probably wouldn't be upset, but clearly she was, and it was damaging. It was awful to watch that.
I agree. I had the same feeling when I saw that. She wasn't recognizable. Amy, or Mother God 2018 on, was not recognizable, even to the person that she was in 2014 and 2015 when I was with the team. But, the seeds were planted, and you could see, how a couple of years of spiraling out of control into that delusion would end up in a place like that. But yeah, I would agree with you. There was rage there, and it became, there was a moment where it stopped becoming us helping humanity with an awakening, and it became about following her. It wasn't about humanity anymore. It was about her. And she wanted the spotlight. And, we had a moment when I was there where she actually made the conscious decision to go in that direction. There was a fork in the road moment, and she chose that direction. So years later, after walking that path, it was shocking to see, but it wasn't surprising at the same time, because you could almost, see it coming.
Okay. So while I was watching the documentary, it's obvious to me that the group had some political leanings, including ties to QAnon. You mentioned earlier, conspiracy theorist earlier. So what's that story?
Yeah, so, like I mentioned, the conspiracy theories and the cults play a large role together. They have a almost symbiotic relationship in the sense that, the conspiracy theories, as I mentioned, kind of destroy people's worldview, open them up to asking questions, and here comes the cult with the answers. And you think you found your community because nobody else is asking the questions, but unfortunately, they've lost their objectivity. Some of these conspiracy theories have a bit of truth to them in some senses. Otherwise, nobody would pay any attention to them. Like, there's just enough, a little bit there. There's just enough to kind of hook people and get them thinking that this is real, and conflating, belief with truth, conflating what they want to be true with what reality actually is. And what Amy did, as I mentioned, she was an opportunist, and, anything that came along, she would always look to make it her own. With the QAnon, just like I said, she would tell stories of her past, and weave how she was meant to be Mother God into all of these stories. She would do the same thing with the conspiracy theories and find a way to place herself centrally into these conspiracy theories or these stories. And with the QAnon, I wasn't there with the team when this particular conspiracy theory or this line of theories came out. But I know just by knowing her that she would try to co-opt it and essentially say that these her angels or her gods are telling her, giving her this information, and she's working with them on the angelic level, and they are passing the information to the people in QAnon who are the good guys fighting against the bad guys behind the scenes that nobody sees, just co-opting the conspiracy theories and placing herself into these any way she can. And that's what she would do with the conspiracy theories, QAnon in particular.
Okay. So looking back, are there any parts of Love as One that you found value in that you could use going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would make the distinction, not just because it was Love Has Won, but because it was an extreme experience. And the extremity of the experience itself was equally matched by the amount of catalyst it created as potential for your own growth, right? Like if you play it safe down the middle of the road, you may have a great life, a very normal, typical life. You don't, stray too far left. You don't stray too far right down the center. Nothing crazy happens. It's normal, but you don't give yourself opportunities to experience, things that can teach you or give you the opportunity to learn in a way that isn't possible anyway else. And I hope I'm making sense with what I'm getting at here, which is that the experience itself was valuable in that it was an extreme experience, and the situations that I found myself in were so unique, situations that you wouldn't find anywhere else, asking yourself questions, confronting your own fears, your own beliefs, confronting the difference between belief and truth. What is the difference? Is there a difference? All of these questions that you ask yourself just by being a member of Love Has Won, made it an extremely valuable experience for me once I processed it and learned from it and set my intention on growing from the experience. But without that intention and sticking to it of growth, I don't think it would have been a valuable experience at all. I think it probably would have been extremely detrimental. But because I was dedicated to growing from it and moving beyond it, I turned the experience into an opportunity to learn. And in that way, it was a unique experience that gave me a unique view. And in that way, I think it was valuable.
All right. So how would you describe your path now on a spiritual level?
Specifically, I'm reading a lot about Jesus right now, learning about Jesus. I mean, I don't consider myself, a religious person. I believe in Jesus very much. I pray a lot. I meditate a lot. I believe in God. I don't know what's true in the sense that I have learned from Love Has Won that belief and truth are not the same thing. And in my life and through this experience, it's become important to me, for obvious reasons, to make the distinction between what is belief and what is truth. And I'm on the path of seeking still to this day. I consider myself somebody who is seeking truth. I don't know if it's something ever to be found. I think it's just something to be sought, in the same way that, we seek to know God, the same way we seek to know Jesus. Do we ever arrive at the destination, or is it the trip itself that is the meaning? And that's where I find myself spiritually right now, is just, open-minded still, objective at the same time, because of my experiences, not gonna, make the same mistakes I did once. I've learned a lot from them. But I'm in a place right now where I'm really interested in learning about Jesus's life specifically. I'm reading a book about him, and it's interesting. It's just a feeling that had come over me in the past few months that just started to grow. And I've always been spiritual this whole time. But, I guess it kind of just takes on a life of its own. And, right now that's the direction I'm headed in. I'm very interested to learn about Jesus's life. I pray and meditate a lot, and I believe in God.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I don't know what's true and what isn't, but as somebody who fought cancer and had to face their own mortality, I want to believe that this life is, for a lack of better terms, like a dress rehearsal, or that, life exists beyond this incarnation, if you will, or this experience in this body.
Yeah, we're going to be talking.
I believe that.
We're going to be talking about that topic coming up soon.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this conversation with former Love Has Won member Andrew Ryan Profaci.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stories from Real Life. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Let's meet right here every Tuesday and Friday. See you then.